Welcome back to IGN's History of Awesome, a year-by-year breakdown of big events that shaped pop culture. 1984 was a golden year for super creative genre movies. Everything from Temple of Doom and Ghostbusters to the Terminator and Nightmare on Elm Street. Transformers also debuted on TV, spawning a massive franchise worth bajillions, and the Apple Macintosh launched, redefining personal computers. Let's now talk about these events and more as we look back on the year 1984.
What's up, everybody? This is the History of Awesome. We're back. This year is 1984, very Orwellian year.
Yeah.
It's the year that George Orwell obviously predicted was going to yield all kinds of things. He didn't predict, though, it was going to yield awesome movies like The Terminator and Ghostbusters.
Shows what he knew.
He didn't know much, right?
Yep, that's George Orwell.
He actually knew quite a bit, I think.
He was a lot. Yeah.
Now, 1984 had other things going on in it that we're not going to talk about, but they bear mentioning right now.
They get the honorable mention.
Breaking 2.
And Breaking.
And Breaking. You got to do 2 movies in 1 year.
Oh, yeah.
The original sequel.
We should introduce ourselves real quick.
Nah, let's go right in. I'm kidding.
Screw it.
I'm Chris Carl.
Justin Davis.
John Ryan.
Jared Petty.
Awesome. Now you know us. You're about to know us a whole lot better because we're going to share stories of our youth, etc.
It's true.
So I want to kick it off with one of the things that was most important to me in 1984, which is little Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters.
Fantastic.
Not only was it the very first cassette tape I owned.
Wow.
It was a very cherished movie-going experience for me. Obviously, this movie, it's actually rated as the #1 comedy of all time by IGN.com.
Yeah, what do they know, though?
That's fair.
Written by Aykroyd and Ramis. It was kind of one of the first movies that blends like horror and like comedy.
Yeah, we'd seen some stuff like The Addams Family and some of that stuff, but Ghostbusters, another movie we're going to talk about later, that was the one that made horror comedy a thing and that continued to be a thing for decades into the present day.
This incredibly talented cast of comics together there. You know, you've got Rick Moranis there, and you've got Sigourney Weaver working there with Aykroyd, and it just all of these people coming together to form...
kind of serendipitously coming together. Like it wasn't even the intention.
Right. I mean, this was originally for Belushi, right?
Yeah. It was Belushi and Aykroyd were going to be in it, and it was going to be way, way higher budget originally because it was going to go... they were going to go through space and time and do all these things.
Like much more of like an action movie, you know, the high budget sort of affair, like what you think about, and then they ended up, I mean, they made the right call.
It's one of those happy accidents where we get Bill Murray in this movie. And Bill Murray is this movie to some extent.
Yeah.
Oh, there's fantastic one-liners, that deadpan humor. I grew up...
Listen, do you smell that?
Yeah. Sorry, you got me. I grew up worshiping Peter Venkman. I thought he was the coolest guy ever.
Because he was.
Yeah.
He didn't care. And even as a little kid, I was like, that guy doesn't care at all. He just does whatever he wants.
But it's funny because nowadays, if Peter Venkman showed up in 2015, people would think he was a jerk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
He was a jerk, but he didn't
but he's
care.
an 80s jerk, and it's fine.
80s jerks are great. We love those guys.
2015 jerks are just
when I saw this movie, I saw it in the theater, and it had been in the theater for a long time. It was one of you know, back in the 80s, you could have a movie in the theater for like ever.
They would never go away.
And then it would go into dollar theaters and stuff like that. So actually, when this movie came out, I went to see it. It was right across the street from Terminator, which came out months later. And
Such a hard decision.
Well, I mean, I was really young at the time, so it wasn't like that hard of a decision. My dad was never going to take me to that. But I can remember coming out of Ghostbusters and just being like super jazzed up. I think I went home and started working on my Halloween costume that day.
That's awesome.
Well, it's such a wonderful collection.
Library ghost?
What?
Were you the library ghost?
yeah. I bought my little Victorian dress and everything.
But that's a good. It's such a wonderful collection of images. Some of them, as a kid, were very scary. The library ghost terrified me.
Oh yeah.
I really thought that part was frightening.
It's a great opening to a film.
Yeah, a couple of the other jump scares. But then also you have a giant man made of marshmallows. You know,
who is the most horrifying creature in that movie?
He is. That and the kind of David Bowie, take on Gozer there at the end.
I liked that. I thought the Gozer at the end
rad.
Absolutely incredible. I feel like this movie holds up. Like it doesn't. You watch it now. Anytime it's on TV, I kind of watch it to the end.
Yeah, it's one of those things like you're flipping channels, and it can be anywhere in the movie, and you'll just sit there and watch the rest. Like even if you have places to go.
The only thing that's weird about it is that the villain is with the Environmental Protection Agency. And he's such a jerk, and like the movie totally holds up, but then I see that bit, it's like he's from the EPA and trying to shut him down. I'm like,
well, it was the 80s.
Well,
it's the 80s.
That's the thing, it's the 80s. Like everyone's like, no, the environment doesn't matter. Blow it all up. Throw
Kill
oil
the
on it,
owls.
it'll be fine.
Throw oil on the owls. Set them on fire. That's all right. Yeah.
So many one-liners in this movie. What's your favorite quote from this film?
40 Years of Darkness, Dogs and Cats Living Together.
Yeah.
that's trite, but it's my favorite.
I think it's true, Your Honor. This man has no dick.
That's mine too.
That's so good, and I'm gonna miss him.
That seems so naughty to me when I was a kid too. When he said it, I was like, oh my god, I guess I'll use that in the playground later. Try that out for size.
Yeah, I really like Did You Smell That from the opening seconds of that movie. The interesting thing about Ghostbusters for me is that there was all this, like the 80s is when they figured out merchandising, right? Like Ninja Turtles and Transformers, I mean everything. But Ghostbusters was the first thing for me where the merchandise was bigger than the actual property. Because I had that Proton Pack toy that I think every little boy had.
Yeah.
And it was such a huge deal, I was so excited. And for me, that toy and the Ecto-1, that was Ghostbusters for me, way more so than actually watching the film was. Like I was really little, I didn't even hardly get the jokes when I was little.
Well, they had the brilliant idea of the cartoon spin-off, which made it relatable to kids, and that in turn let them make kind of a Trojan horse for the toy line.
Yeah.
And that worked out well. I mean, a lot of kids wanted to see the movie, some of them did, and those that didn't saw the cartoon, knew the characters, and that helped it get into
We're gonna see a lot of that in this year, little toys creeping in.
Oh, man.
Too,
and you touched on it, but the song too, right? Like,
oh, dude, the soundtrack was so good. I mean, it was originally, as you guys know, it was going to be Huey Lewis who was supposed to do that song, and then he turned it down, and then they got Ray Parker Jr. to do it. And sounds a little like Huey Lewis.
I don't think I'll ever say this again in my life, but I'm glad Huey Lewis didn't get that job.
Yeah?
So many happy accidents.
You're right. I want Huey Lewis to get all the jobs.
I want him to get all the jobs except Ghostbusters.
He had some Power of Love to get to. You know,
yeah, it's true. He had to go take care of Back to the Future.
Oh, that's
he
right.
had his time.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, he got his. You're right. Absolutely.
In a big way, too. He had his own cartoon show as well.
Huey Lewis?
Yeah, well, not show, but like the theme song.
He and Punky Brewster fight evil together?
Oh, my God, that'd be amazing.
It would.
We're getting off topic.
Ghostbusters, so good. And we're going to switch gears a little bit, take it to Games World. I made it sound like it's a place, like Battle World.
It's a channel on IGN.
We'll go to Battle World later. Games World. In Games World,
this
King's
was the year,
Quest.
King's Quest. This
From
is the year
Sierra.
of King's Quest. From Sierra.
Famously designed by Roberta Williams.
Right.
One of the only, or certainly in that time, the most notable, most well-known female game designer, developer.
Yeah, I'd say so. If you knew about, one of the reasons for that is that Sierra did a good job of letting people know who made their games. They wanted to make rock stars out of their developers early on, and they did a pretty good job of putting people's names on the boxes and making sure you knew who was behind these things. But the cool thing about King's Quest is it's a fiendishly difficult video game.
Yes.
Just vicious.
It's mean.
But yeah, it is mean. It is mean. There's so many ways to die, and you'll come up with something clever. You're like, oh, I got by the alligators. I'm swimming. Well, they're still alligators. They eat you. You know, they find or
It's
move
the
this
Dark
rock.
Souls of the 1980s.
It is kind of. You move this rock to solve the puzzle. The rock just falls on you and kills you. That's my favorite moment. You have to move a rock, so you move it. It just falls on you. You die. But they looked at PCs and they said, what are these things good at? Well, they weren't really good at action games at that point, but they were really good at generating beautiful still images. So they built a game around that idea. They'd already experimented with that with Mystery House and some other text adventure games with simple graphics.
Quaintly called their high-res adventures.
Yeah, exactly. And those were just a bunch of lines that the program drew on the fly. But they kept building on that, and King's Quest is really kind of where it all came together. King's Quest 1 is not the best King's Quest game, but it's very flavorful and enjoyable and important. It's got some good humor to it. Frustrating as all, but a different kind of video game for a new generation of gamer that was starting to make a color PC a part of their day-to-day life, looking for something to do with this really expensive device they bought to keep recipes on.
Yeah.
And it set up all those Sierra games that came after it, including Black Cauldron, which is my favorite. Space Quest and Police Quest and even Leisure Suit Larry got its start there. So
it's a really important seminal point-and-click adventure game. Sort of graduated us out of text adventures into. Although text adventures did, there is some overlap there. But it was really early. Like King's Quest. I mean, we're talking about the early '80s still. That's early for that game to have really set the tone for what was to come.
They also inspired rivals, that would become LucasArts and that whole other school, of forgiving, humorous adventure games versus viciously evil adventure games.
Although the Lucas games now still seem a little viciously evil.
But not like King's Quest.
Not like King's Quest. You're absolutely right.
Go back and try to get 2 screens of King's Quest now.
It's true. It's
not
true.
Easy.
I played the MS-DOS emulator version of Black Cauldron recently, and I was like, oh God, this is I can't do it. I can't do it. Okay, moving on. I want to talk about the Terminator. I mentioned it earlier. This is what put James Cameron on the map. Came out October 26th.
It wasn't Piranha 2?
Well, it was
This
clearly
is what put
Piranha.
James Cameron on the map. Yeah.
This is what remapped him.
Yeah.
This is produced by Gale Ann Hurd, who has gone on to do many films, but also is currently doing The Walking Dead.
Yep.
This was a surprise hit. It wasn't meant to be a hit. They didn't think critics were going to like it.
Yeah.
They didn't know what they had. It went through so many. Basically, nobody wanted to make it.
Yeah.
And then it got made, and thank God it got made.
Well, and even it's another kind of example, a little bit like Ghostbusters, with a lot of happy accidents. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger already was an action star thanks to Conan, but you know he hadn't displayed a tremendous amount of range at this point. You know, he just sort of played this big muscly man that beat things over the head with
I
swords.
don't know if you can really call the Terminator in the first one range.
No, he had a lot of range.
Let me. I know we're still not seeing range from him, but I'm just saying like they could have put anybody into that
and it
role.
really, I mean, Conan, like you said, it was kind of he was an action star, but he wasn't necessarily on like a national stage. Like he was out there in Conan. People knew him if they followed like the action and the fantasy genres. But the Terminator was the first time like everyone's like, oh my God, you got to go see this movie. It's so good.
And when Arnold's walking through that police station in the sunglasses and fighting off 6 trillion cops, he's frightening. It works.
Yeah.
He's got this kind of robotic demeanor. He's a huge human being, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a cybernetic killer robot from the future.
Right.
Sure, I believe that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that he originally wanted to change the "I'll be back" line to "I will be back" because he couldn't say "oh," and so James Cameron is just like, just do your best with it. And of course now it's super iconic. But Cameron was also saying his voice sounded computerized because of the weird accent.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. A lot of happy accents. Schwarzenegger actually read for Kyle Reese.
No kidding.
Yeah, he was not meant to be that. So that's interesting in and of itself.
Now, you talk about that Kyle Reese. I remember watching this. This is one of those movies I saw as a kid that I shouldn't have.
Right.
And I remember that he and Linda Hamilton get it on in the hotel room, and all those pipe bombs are sitting over there. And as a child,
That's what you remember from that scene?
Yeah, that's what I was terrified. For some reason, the bombs were going to go off and kill them while they were naked.
And that's just
Wait, and then their lovemaking was going to spark the bombs?
I didn't know why. I just remember sitting there thinking those bombs are going to explode and they're going to die, and I was so scared.
Intro to human sexuality.
Yeah. The credits roll. Little Jared doesn't understand how movies work.
That's it. Or sex or anything else, apparently. Yeah.
There's so much lore around this movie, and like I said, it was a lot of trouble getting made. But to seal the deal, Cameron sent Lance Henriksen into the pitch meeting dressed as the Terminator. He kicked in the door and basically like sat there all stoic, and then James Cameron walked in afterwards and then gave the pitch. And they were like, okay, it was Orion Pictures. They were like, okay, we're going to do this movie. He sold the rights, by the way, to Gale Ann Hurd for $1 to produce the movie and said, I have to direct it. And that's how he broke in.
Okay.
Most prolific, money-making director of all time.
Yeah.
And if you really want to scare people into making your movie, just send Lance Henriksen.
I would do it now.
He's terrifying.
And still a thoroughly enjoyable movie. The special effects don't hold up, but
I think they do.
Really?
Stan Winston effects hold up no matter when you're looking.
I feel like I'm looking at a lot of like spray painted metal stuff up there, but I love it. I don't want to take away from that.
I remember watching on home video cassette this because this came out before I was born, unfortunately. But the first time I saw the Terminator, when he has to do the surgery on his eye, and like if you watch it on TV now, and I think even in some of like the online cuts, they take out a bunch of that. Like you don't see him peel away the skin and and it looked so good. It gave me nightmares for weeks.
I'm with you. That part does really hold up.
It was
that looks
awesome.
Amazing. Yeah. And the movie itself is thoroughly enjoyable to this day. Also gave us the Metal Gear video game box with the Kyle Reese shot.
Kyle Reese shot. Cameron wanted to put the liquid Terminator in this movie. They didn't have the budget for it. He didn't know how to envision it and get it in this film, and then saved it for the next one. And thank God this was a success because, like I said before, a lot of people were like, "Man, we don't know about this." Similar to a movie called Star Wars, where it was like the genre movie. What's that going to do? So yeah, I mean, I think Terminator is one of the movies that I was most sort of like, I would say like in awe of as a kid because I couldn't go see it myself, and so like when I finally watched it later in life, I was like, it held up to my vision of what it was going to be. Primarily because it's like gory, it's like kind of
totally. I mean, it's definitely one of those movies that, especially as a kid, you hear how like super awesome it is. It was the same thing with Terminator 2. Like, and when you finally get to watch it, you're like, this is beyond my expectations.
Yeah.
Like, none of this let me down.
Right.
It never reaches or even wants to try to reach the levels of like, RoboCop super gore, but it's in that same strain of like sort of gritty sci-fi future, time travel storyline. But it's not like head in the clouds sci-fi. It's really down to earth and just guns and in your face, and man, it's awesome, right? Like
so awesome.
That's so cool.
So also this year,
this episode's gonna be gone. It's gonna be like us on Chris Farley shows. Like, remember that movie? That was cool.
Called History of Awesome, by the way. So we can awesome out a little bit.
Yeah.
And like you're speaking of gore. Another movie that came out that year that's really gore-filled and like raised a lot of eyebrows is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
Follow-up for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Kalima.
This movie
Kalima.
set records opening. It had an opening weekend of $45 million back in 1984.
That's
that was
a lot.
Huge. 333 million total, which is huge from back then.
For
as
then,
well.
yeah, I mean, that's nuts.
But I think we all know that this movie was directly led to PG-13.
Yeah. I remember I went and saw this in the theater with my parents, and I remember walking out and then being like, wow, that was, they were talking about just how bloody it was, how all the eating scenes, in particular, eating the spiders and that terrifying me, the ripping of the heart out, and then being like, wow, that is really intense for a kid. And I was like, woohoo!
I mean, we all.
Although, sorry.
No, I was going to say we all know the real reason PG-13 came of this, and that's Kate Capshaw.
Yeah.
It is unwatchable.
Yeah.
Kate Capshaw, Spielberg is like, he met Kate Capshaw on the set and ended up getting married. And he doesn't like this movie. It's his least favorite of the trilogy. It's the darkest movie for all of those guys, and they had just come off of breakups and all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he was famously going through a divorce, and that sort of, the theory is that led to a darker outing for Indiana Jones. It is a weird movie. It's also like kind of oddly racist in some parts, like the whole dinner scene.
Kind of?
Okay, yeah.
India wouldn't let it shoot in India. That's like, they had to move production to Sri Lanka because of that.
It's just one of those things. But it is a product of its time where it's like, those scamps making fun of
those racist scamps.
Yeah, really. The eyeball soup. And
The movie has a lot of problems. It is, in a way, there's a lot of great action sequences, but it can be kind of soulless in parts. I remember as a kid, I thought the action was cool, but my family and I talked about it on the way home. We're like, it just wasn't as good as Raiders.
I do love that opening sequence, though. You get,
You talking about the Anything Goes musical number?
Well, not that, but like
that is awful.
Or perhaps the escape from the club Obi-Wan.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Fun. That's great.
You get to see Indiana Jones, this sort of suave spy, the side of him in a tuxedo that you actually have never seen, before or since.
We were supposed to see it in that Xbox 360 indie game that never came out,
right.
but alas, it never came out.
Interesting fun facts on this one. Short Round was supposed to, in Lucas's original creation, be a virginal princess.
Really?
That didn't work out.
Super glad that wasn't the case
glad
because
that didn't
we
happen.
got data out of it.
Exactly.
She later became Padme Amidala.
It's a
exactly.
Dr. Jones.
And
You cheat.
I think Short Round's actually named after the
Somebody's
writer's dog. Yeah.
It was like there were a bunch of dog names in this.
I feel like lots of
We named the dog.
lots of
Indiana.
characters. Yeah, there's lots of dog stuff.
That's the wrong movie. That's the wrong movie.
That's where
what I'm saying.
Indiana
Last
originally
Crusade.
came from.
Yeah.
But
We
I know
just
Short
had-
Round was somebody's dog, and I want to say, who else was it? It wasn't Willie. It was.
Willie was Spielberg's dog.
That was Willie. Okay.
Yeah.
It's really, it's a testament to how good the trilogy of movies are. That even though most people, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, Temple is seen as the weakest one. But it still has so many scenes that are just burned into my memory.
Oh, yeah.
Kate Capshaw reaching in to turn the handle, and it's all filled with those bugs.
Yeah, I
Like,
remember that one dude getting crushed by the giant rotating door. That creeped me out as a kid.
Even like darkness and all that stuff thrown in. This was a movie that was coming from dudes who were at the top of their game. It was like Spielberg and Lucas in that era where they were just really, really cranking
It's
out.
like-
It also led to the torture of younger brothers everywhere. I had a friend that convinced his little brother that he could pull his heart out, and so he just call him on. He would dig his fingers into his chest.
That happens so often on the playground. They like try to dig in.
You see like 8 kids doing it at the same time.
Exactly.
Everybody had debates about whether you could actually do that to a human being. You can. No, you can't.
Of course you can. You just need to study
You
that.
can take it out.
I want to believe it.
You can't put it back. That's different. Also, after seeing this movie, I went home and made a voodoo doll. That was shaped like a kid I didn't like. Like I drew his face on it and I stabbed, but it didn't work.
Voodoo is petty revenge, sir.
Yeah, I like that,
I
but
remember
it
that.
kind
Jared
of
Petty
it's a window
revenge.
into your soul, my friend. So, shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about a book. A little book out there.
There's not a lot of books that we snuck into History of Awesome, sadly. There's too many awesome games and movies, but
But this one is big. It's Neuromancer by William Gibson, and you know, it's probably the seminal work of the cyberpunk genre.
Yeah, I think so. I think
it kicked it into high gear. Really.
It did. It really did. It kicked it off the ground. Well, it did what it was pure entertainment, and then took it a step beyond. It's a wonderful, enjoyable novel. It's just a good read, but it's also full of interesting existential ideas that are not presented particularly pretentiously. You know, it's like, you know, your brain can be a computer.
What's incredible about Neuromancer when you read it today is then you're like, wait, what year did this come out?
Yeah.
Like, it was so far ahead of its time. It would have been impressive for this movie to have come out in '94, let alone '84. You know, ideas of cyberspace, where it's not technically the first time that term appeared, but, you know, it popularized the term cyberspace. Yep. You know, the concept of sort of an AI and consciousness being uploaded into a computer.
It's like hackers in general, like a high-level hacker and like a much more developed system.
In 1984, like that's so early for ideas like that to really be fleshed out in a novel.
It's sort of like the Matrix for grown-ups. It's the Matrix with a soul. It's like, what if we follow this idea to its logical end? Is dystopia going to be something that we don't notice that just kind of grows around us, and suddenly the world's awful, and we're like, how did it get here?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, probably. That's how Neuromancer presents the universe. And questions about things like,
not awesome.
what is your mind? What is your soul? What does the future hold for us? When a machine does learn to think, and it's going to happen, what does that mean? Is it alive? Are we alive? You know, and those sound like awfully pretentious questions for a philosophy book. Instead, he wraps it up in a heist novel. And that's what makes it so readable.
About a drug-addled hacker, which is like a good, you know. Yeah, I mean, that's the conceit, and I think it does a lot of good things. You know, he said he said multiple times that he took inspiration from Escape from New York. And he was actually concerned because like a third of the way through his book, Blade Runner came out. Yeah. And he was like, oh, people are going to think I'm a hack, that I'm just stealing stuff. Yeah. And I think it doesn't do that, right? It sets itself apart from that world and presents a different dystopia. So,
yeah, it's cool. Kierkegaard meets Ronin. It's just wonderful.
Right.
Great book.
Now this, I mean, I know everybody out here is going to have an opinion on this, but Transformers TV show came out 1984. This, you couldn't get more of a polar opposite. I guess there's robots and technology.
Yeah, but these are robots in disguise, my friend. Yeah. These are magical, shape-changing robots that have crash-landed on the planet Earth and been asleep a long time and woken up. Now they're evil robots after them, and there's a planet up in space, and they turn into trucks and planes and something new every week because they're gonna sell me another toy the next week.
I don't see what's not to get.
I love it.
Yeah, what's not to get? So this came from the loosening of rules on television, right? Like, for a while, you know, maybe this is a good idea, but for a while you couldn't promote directly to kids to sell toys on TV, and then you could, and then G.I. Joe happened.
Around it.
And so what happened was you had Marvel and Hasbro working together to make this thing, and what they wanted to make was a comic, a TV show, and toys. It's all sort of synergistically combined.
Ouroboros.
Yeah.
Just eating it.
And we will market this to 7-year-olds, and they will want it.
And so they got this, you know, the Transformers came from merging these two toy lines that came from Japan.
Right.
And then they said, oh, this is going to make one hell of a show. And it did. I mean, I don't know any one of my friends who wasn't into the show.
No. The show really had no right to be as entertaining as it was. Like it was a toy. It was a ploy to sell toys, and yet they cast, you know, good actors and had, you know, entertaining plots and took their lore relatively seriously.
Yeah. Peter Cullen. That voice, Optimus Prime, voice of heroism for an entire generation. The Transformers is a dumb show, and I love it anyway because it's about big, freaking giant transforming robots trying to save the world, and it works so well. Even though those two toy lines you talked about, they weren't even to scale. Right. Like, one of the bad guys is a semi-truck, and the other's like a handgun. And those were from different toy lines, but they're like, just write them all together anyway.
Why not?
And, you know, this is also an early example of an anime style. Coming into American television. Now, again, we've got kind of a weird hybrid build of this thing going on, but it's heavily Japanese influence at a time when Japanese culture was becoming more and more important to us. A year later, Nintendo is going to burst through and make us all Japanophiles. This is kind of one of the first injections of that idea. And, you know, they didn't worry with it. The toys were terrifyingly realistic. I was with a friend that was stopped in an airport as a child because he had Megatron in his carry-on.
I thought you were going to say he had a truck in his carry-on.
No, he did not. He had Megatron with his silencer, buttstock, and scope.
Oh,
and
I remember that.
Yeah,
Your friend is dumb.
Well, he was 6.
You should know better.
But I mean, we're at Reagan Airport in D.C. getting stopped with this.
This was, to be honest, probably the time you could carry a gun on the plane now.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, if Schwarzenegger can do it on screen, I can do it at the actual
I can do
airport.
it. Right. So in Japan, they called it Fight Super Robot Life Transformers.
Which I think is a better name.
Why is that not the
I don't know why. I don't know why. And another interesting fun fact, Jim Shooter, who was the head of Marvel Comics at the time, actually came up with the concept of Autobots and Decepticons.
Cool.
How do you know which ones are the good guys or bad guys if you don't
The
know?
bad guy's a gun.
Yeah.
No, maybe because their name is the Decepticon.
Well, the bad guys, generally speaking, the bad guys can fly and the good guys can't.
Yeah.
That's how you tell an Autobot from a Decepticon.
That seems unfair.
It is unfair. Well, I mean, but it's, good guys are often weaker in some ways so that their love can overcome. That's how it works. They have the power of love.
I mean, just practically, one of the things that I liked about the Transformers toys is that it was like 2 toys, right? Like if you wanted to play trucks, you could play trucks, and if you wanted to play robots, you could play robots.
Yeah.
Like that's actually like cool. Like the toys were really intricate and their transformations were complex. Like there was some, real meaningful thought that went into that.
And generally speaking, they were very durable, especially those Gen 1 ones. They were tough, tough as nails. As long as you could avoid losing Optimus Prime's hands, you were pretty much okay. Right. There are more corners of the Earth hidden with Optimus Prime, lost Optimus Prime hands. Archaeologists are going to be finding them for centuries.
Yeah.
What were these?
There used to be this ongoing debate, too, of like, what was better, G.I. Joe or Transformers? What was better?
Transformers.
Ooh, I'm staying out of it.
Transformers.
USA all the way, go Joe.
Yeah, Transformers for me too, just because it had more aspects. It had the transformations, I guess.
I mean, I'm not saying that they weren't better produced. I'm just saying
for you,
USA all the way, go Joe.
G.I. Joe had a bunch of guys dressed in costumes that they purchased at Goodwill, and whereupon Transformers had Orson Welles as an evil planet.
Snake Eyes for Halloween. I could not be a Mack truck that turns into a 20-foot robot.
Although now you see these people cosplaying with like refrigerator boxes, and you're like, how did you think of that crazy?
I can't afford a refrigerator.
And therein lies the rub. So shifting gears again, we're talking about the state of computers back then. And we're talking a little bit about King's Quest and what computer that played on. Yeah. But a new challenger arrives in this year, which is the Macintosh Computer.
Find out why 1984 won't be like 1984. Yeah, stupid, pretentious ad. Yeah, absolutely.
No, it was amazing, though.
Directed by Ridley Scott for $1.5 million.
That was like the commercial you were like,
yeah, and this, of course, is a commercial for the Macintosh, which is a computer that really did revolutionize our expectations of what computing could be.
Yeah.
Mouse, what's that? Macintosh didn't invent the mouse, but it popularized it. It brought it into our hands and made it something that we could all understand very quickly. And this little all-in-one compact, frankly, at the beginning, underpowered machine blew us away. It talked to us. It drew pretty pictures. It could make pages on a screen. It was easy to understand. It was all-encompassing, and man, was it expensive.
Yeah, it was really expensive. I remember the first time I put my hand on a mouse. It was transformative. I was like, what am I doing here? Yeah. And it seems so stupid now, because you're like every day. But
why can't it just read my thoughts?
At the time, holy crap, man! You're like moving something on the screen. I thought it was like. I didn't think it was magic. I knew it wasn't magic. It felt magical, though.
It is a box full of sorcerers.
When your previous experience telling a computer what to do was strange, abstruse, esoteric commands that you typed in on a black screen, it was like it came down from outer space.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. And it's kind of the beginning, it is the beginning of the Steve Jobs era. He did the keynote that became so popular. When they ran ads, they ran them at the Super Bowl. They took out every single ad in Newsweek right after an election. They basically they kind of bullied their way into the market a little bit through marketing, and that is how Apple they went down for a while and then came back in a big way using these same tactics.
Well, it's kind of crazy to look back and see though, just where look at us, look how cool everything is, where that idea that they have now, where it came from. Because I mean, if you watch that keynote from '84. He's like, and now Apple wants to say something to you all, and he puts the button in the thing. He's like, hello, Steve, I am robot, please buy me. And it's like, oh, okay, so they haven't changed marketing strategies.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's incredible that you can
1980s.
see a direct through line from there to the present day, like that corporate culture endures.
And it's kind of their MO. They did these things and repackaged things that existed, similar to what they did with the iPod to come back.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that techno-fetishism, you have the common man.
Good word usage,
yes.
Yeah,
by the way.
the poor person, me.
And me.
And then you had, for people like that, the same year you had the Tandy 1000. And while that is not nearly as glorious a computer, that was probably a more important development in the history of computing. Because what the Tandy 1000 did was put PC compatibles in people's houses because it was cheap as dirt, you could buy it anywhere, and you could get easy financing on it. And that's a part of the story I think gets missed a lot of the time, is you could do financing through Radio Shack back before everybody had credit cards.
Yep.
So you could buy, it wasn't buy this computer for $1,200.
Back when people shopped at Radio Shack.
Yeah, it was buy this computer for $50 a month. That was the way they tried to get it to you. And so everybody went out, and the Tandy 1000 was a near 100% PC compatible, but it was actually better than IBM's PC in certain ways. It had built-in 16-color graphics, 3-channel sound, and joystick ports, which meant it was ready for games.
It was a super gaming system, and I had one. I can remember, I think my parents took advantage of the payment plan and all that stuff. And so, like, I could not tell you, that was probably one of the biggest moments of my young life is when that computer came home. Oh, yeah. Because I knew everything I could do with it. I was like, I'm going to write, I wrote stories on it. I would program, I would get Compute Magazine and type in all the code in the back of the magazine to make those little programs. I would, and then I scoured, I just scoured the magazines. I went to any computer store I could go, like, to try to get software for it.
And
it was crazy.
It came with a great software suite. That was the other part. It wasn't as pretty as the Macs, but it was all kind of point and click with the keyboard. And it was a word processor and a little database program and a little music composition program. And all this came in the box with it. So it's like, here's 20 things you can do with your computer and never have to look at that DOS screen. And that also made it very approachable. Yeah. And it was cheap.
Yeah,
it was cheap.
I had one. One of my favorite games to this day of all time is Thexter, which I played on my Tandy forever.
Thexter's a good game.
It's a deep cut.
Yeah. And that is how you tie it back to Transformers, because it was a transforming jet. So good. And there's an actual great remake, but it also packages the original in on the PS3. That was pretty amazing. So Thexter. But Tandy 1000, I had when you had one. Did you guys have Tandys?
No, we had some 386 processor a few years later.
Yeah, I'm sadly too young to remember the old Tandy days.
I love like the Apple IIc, all that stuff as well. But Tandy was seriously the computer that made me fall in love with computer gaming, and I owe it a huge debt of gratitude, not grat of datitude.
Well,
it could be both. Grat of datitude would be amazing.
A grat of datitude.
How much is one gret?
I don't know the grat exchange rate.
Oh, of course.
So now I wore the sweater for a reason.
Yeah,
it's not Christmas in the studio. It's I wore this because Gremlins came out, and weirdly came out on the very same day as Ghostbusters, which would never happen now.
How insane is that? So we gave
That would be
Ghostbusters.
pushed back to 1987.
We gave Ghostbusters a huge amount of credit for kicking off the horror comedy thing, but Gremlins as well, right?
Right there with it.
On the same day. It's insane. And if you, again, I feel like people conflate Gremlins 2 with Gremlins, and if you watch that original, it is a black comedy. Like,
a lot of people get killed in that, and a lot of furry little animals with their horrific ends.
The sequel, the sequel has some of that too, but it's very
It doesn't have one
different.
getting microwaved until it explodes or thrown in a blender.
Yeah.
They wanted it, well, Joe Dante wanted it to go even more hardcore. They wanted to have
I would love to see that movie.
Gremlins go into the McDonald's and eat the people rather than the food. He wanted the dog to get its fur pulled off of it.
I don't want to see that, but I want to see that first thing.
The other thing is like he and Spielberg totally conflicted about that weird Santa Claus story where they were telling the Santa Claus story. Like nobody wanted that. The studio didn't want that. Spielberg didn't want it. Joe Dante stuck to his guns.
Like, no,
we're
putting it in there.
We're putting it in there. And Spielberg eventually relented. He's like, "Yep, it's your movie. It's your vision."
Cool.
They let it be in there. But I have memories of Gremlins just being kind of horrifying when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You see this cute Mogwai and you're like, oh, and then you see the movie and you're like, wow.
Yeah, I mean the transformation scene. The first time I saw it, it was just like, oh, it's so. Oh wait, no. Everything just got so much worse. Like it's like the portal into the other side opened, and I just saw all that was wrong with the world.
My mom and dad wouldn't let me go see it, and so I had friends at school that went, and they were telling me how awesome it was, and they had Gremlins lunchboxes and Gremlins toys, and I was like, I want to experience this amazing thing. And unfortunately, in a pre-VHS universe, there wasn't a lot I could. I mean, it existed in the world, but not for me. And didn't get to see it for a long time.
My parents did things where they would like wait, and I feel like their waiting was like waiting until I got older. Like they would be like, "You're gonna wait almost a year, but it'll still be in theaters, and then you can watch it." And it's like, well, I guess I'm kind of older.
You're 6 months older than you were, and now none of my friends want to talk about it anymore.
You understand so much more about the world. Now, this movie came out in the summer. It came out June 8th,
which is super weird because you would think it's a Christmas movie, but I forget who the producer was. But they were like, no, we should release it at Christmas time. So and he's like, no. It's an action movie. It's not a Christmas movie.
One of the big Christmas movies, I think, if it had been released in that frame. I think people would like actually tie it to Christmas more. Sometimes I think people forget that it's even a Christmas movie. It's set in Christmas.
I think it's really hard to. I mean,
hard
they made
to forget.
a sweater out of it.
They made a sweater. I mean, what more can you say? So the budget was $11 million. It grossed $153 million.
Whoa!
I mean, that is twice as much as Terminator, by the way.
Yeah. And there wasn't much. I mean, outside of practical effects, there wasn't much on screen there.
But let's talk about those practical effects. I mean, that was some pretty spectacular puppetry with the Gremlins. They have a lot of personality. They really do. You don't have as many of the individualized Gremlins in this one like you do in the sequel. But you do. You can clearly see both the glee and the wickedness conveyed in the eyes of those little puppets, and that's very well done.
That's Stan Winston again, right?
Yeah, and you know, it was supposed.
He was the '80s.
I know he was the '80s, but I'm just saying, like, you look at his body of work and like see he can go from the Terminator to Gremlins.
Yeah.
And like, God, the world is a sorely less bright place for having lost him. Like, I'm serious.
Eloquently put.
His work is amazing.
Yeah, it is.
You know, Gizmo was originally going to be one aspect of Stripe. That's another way that the movie's gonna be darker. So Gizmo is actually gonna turn into Stripe. So the protagonist creature was gonna be the ultimate antagonist, and Spielberg was the one who said, "Yeah, you know, we're not going that way."
Because they'd have had to kill Gizmo in the end.
That would be like the horrible. Like, you're not gonna sell a toy after that.
No.
There's also this like weird undercurrent in the movie of like designer pets, which didn't even really exist at the time, but it was like, you guys, you shouldn't be you're not responsible enough to own this thing.
Yeah, there are weird sort of messages in this movie that you probably don't pick up on when you're a kid, like over-reliance on technology and designer pets. There is some weird stuff like that in Gremlins.
I was horrified to go to science class because of the whole thing that happens in the high school and the science lab. I was like, I don't want to go to high school now. You know.
Anytime I saw an old lady on one of those stair ride chairs, I freaked out. I was like, no, don't get off of that. It will kill you.
I just left her house at that point. Get out of here, lady.
I never saw my grandmother again.
So, also in 1984, this year was really big. I mean, we left a lot of stuff out. We left out Splash, for God's sake.
Red Dawn.
Red Dawn.
I mean, honestly, that's a big one because we're talking about how Gremlins and Indy kind of made the PG-13 rating. I mean, Red Dawn is the first PG-13 movie. It's kind of a huge deal. And of course, like you said, Splash. I mean, Daryl Hannah, Tom Hanks, she's a mermaid, he's a dude. It's amazing.
Also, if it hadn't been for Red Dawn, we would not have had Walter from The Big Lebowski.
It's true.
It's
true.
Yes.
Also in '84, Secret Wars, the storyline kicked off. And that is, my friends, another marketing strategy.
Yep.
It was another thing that was tied into the whole scramble for toys.
Yeah, it was insane reading up on the history of Secret Wars before we came into the studio here, where I knew, like, I wasn't a giant comic book kid growing up. Actually, ironically, I've gotten more into them as I've gotten older.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I knew it was a huge crossover, this big event, and it's only called Secret Wars because two marketing dudes were like, here's what kids like, secrets and wars. And that's
huge.
That's literally it.
And the whole reason for it was they're like, we need to have a battle where every hero fights every villain.
Yeah. We need a play set.
Yeah, and then they said the toy companies were literally like, you need to come up with, you know, new fortresses and new, you know, sort of things so we can sell new toys. And like, and again, sort of to the creators' credit, you know, it could have been and probably should have been just hot garbage. But it actually turned out to be like, you know, a good, like an interesting crossover storyline, like a big epic. They took it more seriously than they needed to.
Yeah, this ultimately gave us Venom for crying out loud.
Exactly.
I mean, that's, if nothing else, there's a legacy of Secret Wars. But and also this idea that crossover is becoming such a big thing. A year later, you know, DC would kind of mimic this and build on it with Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yep.
And you have another huge storyline spanning a lot of issues. As a kid, I didn't have subscriptions though, and this drove me crazy. I would buy an issue that would have a Secret Wars story, and I would want to read the next one, but I couldn't get back to the store and get it, so I'd have to read like 3 later, and I'd be like, what happened between these?
Before there was a comic book store in my town, we just had to buy them in like, you know, wherever, drugstores, grocery stores, wherever. And so, yeah, I was the same way. I would have an issue here and there, and I'd be like, what's happening? What is the Beyonder doing to these people?
Going on? Also, who's the Beyonder?
Yeah. Beyonder is some rad 80s dude who just shows up and he's like, fight everybody.
He's some lame 80s nerd.
He's got like the quintessential 80s outfit on too.
Yeah,
awesome.
like he was just one of those wonderful products of kind of 80s like whatever kind of hubris, where it's just like, hey, he's the Beyonder and he's from not Earth.
Do you know where he's from? It's Beyond, okay? The name means something.
I really love that the name Secret Wars was just focus tested all the hell, and that's how we ended up with it. And then it's still like 2015. It's like
they're doing Secret Wars again.
They made the TV shows. They've done cartoons.
Yeah, and now it's percolated all through the decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I cannot believe how many big movies were in this year.
Yeah.
Karate Kid.
Yep.
Oh, who didn't do some karate kidding out in the school playground?
Just standing there trying to crane kick as hard as you can.
I did constantly. If there was a post of any kind in 1984, there was a child standing on it doing a crane kick. That was happening.
My dad was really good at tricking me into washing his car.
Yeah, so wax on, wax off. But, okay, so this movie, I think we tend to look back on it and kind of deride it. I don't think it's fair. I've watched it recently. I feel like this movie holds up really well.
It's totally good. I think it's got a really good heart.
Yeah.
You know, I think Daniel is a really good kid, right? Like, it's a great message. Like, learn to, come to respect your mentor. Like, it's fantastic.
Don't be Joe Piscopo.
No, don't be Joe.
Pat Morita's character, Mr. Miyagi, a character with a lot of depth. His family was lost in an internment camp while he was fighting for the United States in World War II. He received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for that role. And I think there's a lot there. This was one of the first places where I ever became aware of the internment camps, which would finally be apologized for by the American government 4 years after this in 1988.
All thanks to Pat Morita.
Yeah, well, that's how I found out about it. I think it's how a lot of people found out about it.
Points off because this one did not have a Peter Cetera song, though.
No, it did not.
They saved that for 2.
But it did have one of the best sports movie montages ever in You're the Best Around. Also, Sweep the Leg.
Sweep the Leg.
That under a culture. Yeah.
How often did you do that to like try to
fix anything?
It was like my Robitussin.
Yeah. Also, this movie written by the same guy that created. I've gone and forgotten it. Lethal Weapon 3.
Yeah.
Same script writer and The Fifth Element of all things.
Fun
really
fact,
weird.
just the same script for those 2 movies.
Really, the 1, 3, and The Fifth Element.
They were gonna flip flop them.
The budget for this one, $8 million, made $91 million. Yes. So these movies are cashing in.
Yeah.
Last thing we have time for, we're gonna have to blaze through it a little bit. Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oof.
So good. I mean, obviously created a horror icon, and actually Wes Craven wrote and directed this movie. He named the villain after his high school bully.
Yep.
Okay.
That's the ultimate revenge when you become a screenwriter.
Yeah.
I wonder if the real life Freddy Krueger is just like watch that and he's like, oh man.
The thing people forget about '84 Nightmare on Elm Street is it was scary.
Yeah.
The Krueger movies always have an element of humor, but they just kind of ran with that after the first one.
Yeah, they can't really be.
The first one's very different. It's Krueger is not much of an anti-hero in it at all, or really at all. Like
he's straight up. He murdered children, and now he's doing it in their dreams.
People root for him in the later movies.
Yeah, well, I see that, and you see why. Like,
but there is that element of punishing the sexy teens. Like that's a thing in all of those sort of 80s movies.
I mean there is, but like they don't give Jason like a really horrible backstory.
Yeah,
like it's like he's like a mentally challenged kid and his mom murdered. But like with Freddy, it's like, oh no, he like lured children down to the basement of the school and brutally murdered them.
Yep. Not a stand-up guy.
No.
And then, you totally forget that. It's one of the reasons that Craven didn't want this to become a franchise. He took himself off the second movie. It became a franchise anyway.
Yep.
Obviously, Robert Englund killed it. Here's some really, really interesting trivia stuff. Heather Langenkamp beat out Demi Moore, Courtney Cox, and Jennifer Grey, who was huge at the time. And Johnny Depp beat out Brad Pitt, Nicolas Cage, Kiefer Sutherland, and John Cusack for that role. And it's like one of the early Johnny Depp roles. He gets... brutally slain.
Another really great example of super cool 80s practical effects.
Yeah.
When, he gets sucked into the bed and then that geyser shoots out. But like they built this this full bedroom set on not even mechanically operated, like a hand turning gimbal. Like you pushed it once and the whole room spun. It was so cool.
Yeah, absolutely awesome. And it's one of those movies that is the ultimate scary idea because it's somebody haunting your dreams. You can't escape in any way.
Yeah, you can't.
And then those dumb kids still always try. What do you think you're accomplishing?
Well, they got a bunch of no-dos and they tried to stay up. It's just not going to cut it.
You can only do that for so long.
Micro naps, people.
What if he gets in there? What if he gets into the micro naps?
That's true.
I only sleep for 20 seconds 18 times a day.
He'll do it. It doesn't matter.
Still not very much.
So obviously really huge, led to a string of sequels, all kinds of other stuff.
Some really great theme park attractions.
Yeah. One of the best sort of 80s horror movies, and like you guys said, like the original was the one that was actually Freddy Krueger at his scariest.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Thank you so much for joining us for History of Awesome. We'll be back with another episode. We're obviously going on to 1985.
Spoilers.
Yeah, sorry. We're going on to 1985, so keep it here on IGN.com.